Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast. My name is Dan Murphy, and with me always is Derek Brissett and Stu Hardy. We'd like to take a moment as the Rouge Rugby podcast to offer our condolences to the family and friends of Jake Webster, former Canada Sevens player, Ontario Blues player, after his sudden passing. Um, all you really need to do is look at his former teammates' social media pages. Like Nate Hirayama has posted some beautiful stuff about Jake as a teammate and as a friend, and you really get a sense of how loved he was. Um, and because this is the holiday season and it is a time of giving, there is currently a GoFundMe to support his young family. A sudden death like this is hard on a family, both emotionally and financially. So if you are able to do so, please. The GoFundMe has been shared by the Arrows, by multiple members of the national programs, both 15s and 7s, and by Rugby Canada. So if you're looking to do some good in the world, this is a great way to do it. Um, and gentlemen, let's get started into this. Let's bring a little bit of joy into the world after such a somber start. We got some great little news, and that was that the Mlr schedule was released last week. Now, my first question to you guys is, how do we feel that the league managed to make the schedule with uneven teams?
Yeah, obviously, with the Colorado Raptors dropping out, the league went. I mean, they're still expanding technically from as far as the actual numbers, going from 12 to 13 teams, but it was initially looking like it was going to be 12 to 14 teams, but the uneven numbers are interesting. It's nothing really new to Major League Rugby. We've played a season with 7 teams. We played a season with 9 teams. The wrench into the scenario is the fact that conferences were introduced last year, and now you have an imbalanced conference. I wrote an article for Layman's Sports way back in April or May, I guess, like soon after the Raptors dropped out, and I basically said that, in my opinion, what I thought the best thing to do would be to have, obviously, the West is exactly what the MLR did. Just have everybody plays each other twice, home and away, and then you play 4 games against the East. And then what I said for the East to do was have everybody play each other home and away, play 2 extra games against Eastern opponents, and then play the West 4 times. And Major League Rugby did that with 2 teams. The Free Jacks and RUNY both have that schedule. But the rest of the Eastern Conference teams in Toronto, Old Glory, NOLA, and Rugby ATL, they have 5 games against the West, and they play 1 team 3 times. Whereas RUNY and the Free Jacks, so the Free Jacks have to play Toronto and RUNY 3 times, and RUNY obviously plays the Free Jacks and then Old Glory DC 3 times. So I mean, ultimately, like it is a bit of a challenge, and I was super interested to see how they handled it. Overall, I like it. I'm just the my only kind of, I guess, the quirk is, like, I do kind of wonder why maybe they just didn't go with everybody in the East plays the West 5 times, or everybody plays 4 times. Why there's that little bit of a quirk within Rooney and the Free Jacks, but um ultimately, I think it's good. And I think, to be honest, the way the schedule breaks down, I think it's gonna. We can get into this. Let Stu kind of share his thoughts on the way the season's going to be formatted. But I think it'll be interesting work, because I think now we're going to introduce a new element of Major League Rugby that we haven't really seen before, with the way the schedules are actually played out here.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that MLR have done a very good job with it. Unfortunately, due to the uneven nature and an 18-week season, the reality is some matchups simply can't happen on an annual basis, which is what we have become accustomed to, especially in 2019 with that full season where everyone played each other home and away. I think we have to come to terms with that's now moving away from the traditional rugby schedules that say are similar to Europe, like the Premiership and the top 14. And now we have to move to a more North American type structure. And that has been utilized with the conference system. And I can see in the future, we have the rumors of Chicago joining with it for 2022, and there's probably, you know, other teams that are considering both in the East and the West. And when that happens, when you get into, say, 16 teams, we'll probably have to go into divisions, and that means that a whole segment of the other conference won't be played until 2 years later. So I think this is a best of a bad situation. As you said, obviously, Colorado dropping out with 14 teams, it would have probably been much easier in terms of organizing to have such an even balance. But, you know, I think we've got, I think we all can also develop some tension and some drama and say that, oh, we will. So, for example, the Arrows won't face Giltinis until 2022, and we can really build that up to be once every 2 years. So, you know, you have to put pressure onto this game, and you know you have to get something out of it. So, you know, we do what we can, and I'm just looking forward to actually having MLR games back more than anything.
Yeah, that's the thing is I completely agree, Stu. Can't wait. Like honestly, the best part of the schedule release is like, yeah, there's a schedule. Awesome. We're gonna play games. But I do think though, like kind of what you're saying is like, yeah, there is a bunch of games that aren't gonna happen now. And you know, I think it'll be an interesting thing. Like if we go back to the last full season of MLR in 2019, right? Everybody played the same schedule. There was a 9-team league, 16 games. You played everybody home and away once, right? That's balanced. Everyone was on the same playing field. It's even, right? 2020 was kind of set up to be something similar. Like if you were in the East, you would play everybody once, or everybody home and away once, and then you play the 6 teams in the Western Conference once. The only variation would have been who you played home or away, but everybody had, again, it was a very similar schedule. You played everybody. Now, though, I think that's what I think is most interesting about this, and it has to happen, as Stu said. Math just doesn't work. I think 16 games is this kind of the sweet spot for an MLR season, and it's just as the league grows, much like the NFL, like you're not gonna you know what I mean? Once you start getting 16, 20, 24, 25, 30 teams or whatever, obviously just math. You're not going to play everybody. So yeah, 12 teams is pretty much the cutoff to be able to play everybody. So when you get that 13th team, this is what's going to happen, which means I think it's interesting because I think now for the first time in a Major League Rugby season, strength of schedule is now a thing that could kind of happen, right? Because I think and, you know, there is a lot of parity in the league and parity in the sense that I still think anybody can beat anybody. Even, you know, that 0-16 Austin squad, they put like the fear of God into a couple of teams that were like, oh no, we're going to be that one. That team that they finally get a win against. It never happened, but there were some close games, especially that one against NOLA in that season too. So, I think, but in looking at the schedule right now, like if you look at a team like the Houston SaberCats, in cross conference play, they avoid Toronto and NOLA, right? Which those are some big guns to not have to worry about at all. If you looked at, and I know the Free Jacks had a ton of injuries and stuff last year, and obviously it's a short season. They didn't even get to play a home game. It's an awkward sample size to really judge how good a team is. But if you just look at the literal way the 2020 season ended in the standings, you got the Free Jacks have to play the Free Jacks who finished last in the East now have to play the Toronto Arrows who were first in the East 3 times. Right. Whereas the Arrows, you flip that on the Arrows get who would have been the last place team in the East 3 times. Like I said, it's kind of tough to judge the Free Jacks based on the circumstances of last year. But like just sort of, if you just kind of look at the standings, that's the way it is, right? The best team is playing the first place team is playing the 6th place team 3 times. They also have to play RUNY, who is the team that made the playoffs in 2019. They had a bit of a tough start in 2020 themselves, but like, you know, so it's like you kind of see how like the Free Jacks have to have extra games against those teams. There's teams in the East that have to play Seattle and San Diego in the West going across over. There's teams that only get one of them. Right. And then, you know what I mean? Like there's teams like realistically, even Toronto, right? Like Toronto ends up with San Diego, Seattle, and Utah, right? Who were, you know, 3 of the better teams in the West last year in the super short season. So like it is interesting, and it's like And like I said, there's still a ton of parity in the league in the sense that, on any, sort of go the Al Pacino route on any given Sunday or whatever, like anybody can beat anybody. But, like it's going to come into play at some point next year. Like
Yeah.
we're going to be looking at, it's like, okay, these two teams are in a playoff race, and then like kind of looking at who's left or who they still have to play or whatever. It'll be interesting. And I think as the league grows and there's more teams, like the expansion teams, especially with the way that they've been built, I think, especially like looking at LA, I feel like LA is going to be a little bit of an unknown right now, whereas like
For sure.
the way that their roster is shaped up, it's like they're bringing over a lot of like legendary players that maybe are, toward the end of their career, but they're also kind of mixing it in. So it's like it's a tough team to call ahead of time.
For sure.
So it'll be interesting to see how they actually perform come next year. But yeah, not everybody not having the same schedule is super fascinating. And it's the first time we're going to get to see it next year in 2021. So I'm looking forward to that a lot.
So guys, let's dive into a little bit more. We kind of talked about a few matchups, but what matchups are you guys looking forward to seeing this season? I know for myself, I'm really looking forward to seeing the two expansion teams go at it after each other. Dallas and LA, I believe they start the season against each other. So I'm excited to see that first week, throw the new guys in the pool together and see which one of them comes out less soaked. I'm excited to see that. But what are you guys looking forward to?
So I agree. I'm interested in seeing Dallas and LA, but I'm more interested in their later game, which will be on June the 19th. And I think that's because they'll have more time in the league. They'll have played a few games at that point. And, and then you don't have the first round jitters or dusting off the cobwebs for all those Colorado players that haven't played in so long that are now in different teams. The big game in the similar vein of the 2020 season was San Diego versus Seattle. And when that kicked off the season, and that was a great game to watch. Now, obviously, there was no final in 2020, but a lot of people would have predicted it would have been San Diego versus Toronto, and that's in the second week of the season. So I'm interested in that one.
Now, sorry, Derek. And I just want to kind of talk about that Toronto San Diego game.
I don't know why you're apologizing to me. I wasn't talking, but sure.
Sorry, I heard an exhale. But do we still feel like this is a little bit of a tangent? But do we still feel like San Diego is going to be as much of a threat? Derek kind of mentioned this in our chat the other day that I'm excited because really it's the Arrow's first game with their bye week being the first week. I'm not as I feel like there's a little less bite to that matchup now because of San Diego. And again, like I said, Derek really kind of brought this up about how they're a lot less threatening of a team than they were last year.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if you just look at the list of guys that kind of departed the team right now, no JP Duplessis, no Nanu, no Te'o, no Burton. That's a big chunk of their super dynamic backline that's gone. But I mean, guys like, Mattias and Audsley, they're all still there. Peterson's still there. Augsburger's still there. It's the team's depth is nowhere near as good as what it was last year. But I don't think that means they're going to be a bad team by any stretch. I don't think they've taken that many, it's they've lost some really key guys. But it's one of those things where they have lost a lot of those key guys, but they did have some pretty good depth. So it's JP Duplessis and Nanu are gone, but that just gives guys like Audsley that opens the door for them to have more playing time. And we've already seen what Audsley can do in MLR, right? He's, probably, if it wasn't for the fact that Nanu and JP Duplessis were on his team, he probably starts. And he probably starts at most places in the league too. So, they kind of have that, but I totally agree, man. I wanted to see I don't think they're going to be that that juggernaut that they were shaping up to be in 2020. And yeah, I agree. I want if we're looking at what matchup do you did we miss out on the most in 2020 with COVID? It's 100% San Diego versus Toronto in the 2020 specific renditions of San Diego versus Toronto. But I think if you kind of look at the way the two teams have had the offseason, right, where it's you're going with, like I said, San Diego has lost Burton, JP Duplessis, Nanu, Te'o. Toronto has gained Montero, Tukale, Gonzalez, Cortez. Like it's right. And even if that is at the expense of Moore and Malcolm being out the door, but like, yeah, I think Toronto like has lost those guys, lost Moore and Malcolm, but replaced them and then beyond that too, with talented players. Whereas I don't think San Diego has done nearly as well of a job as to replace the losses that they've had versus Toronto. So yeah, I feel like if we're picking this game right now or whatever, if they were doing like the betting odds, like the way too early, like this game happens in 4 months from now predictions, yeah, Toronto by probably 10, I would say, at the early, like, the early stage predictions here.
Well, I think it is worth mentioning that the Legion have yet to beat the Arrows. And as you mentioned, that there is a lack of depth in the squad, and the Arrows have brought in all these amazing players, that may be set to continue. And this goes back to my point about having matches that occur every 2 years. And say if the Arrows only play Legion every 2 years. Can you imagine the build-up going to future games if the Arrows have 3 on the bounce against San Diego and they don't get the chance to redeem themselves until 2023 and things like that? So, it may not be the game that we were expecting with 2020, but I'm not going to turn it down. I'm still going to be watching that game. And I think another thing that was introduced last year was the Texas Cup, which was between the Gilgronis and the Sabercats. And now we have Dallas in the mix. And I think that would be an interesting like mini table within MLR to know, because obviously the Texan rivalry is going to be a big thing going forward. So if they can build on that, then I think that's something that not only the supporters in Texas can be watching, but supporters of MLR can be watching as well.
I think just kind of on the topic of games that we're kind of most excited about too. Like I feel like you said, Toronto, San Diego, we touched on that, but I think the one that we haven't talked about that I'm super excited about is week 1, NOLA versus Old Glory. Just the first one. Just Major League Rugby will be officially back at 4:00 on March, on that Saturday, right? So, like, I think that's the one that I am I just can't wait to see it back. So if, like, I mean, looking at the schedule, I think the fun thing with the schedule, it's like I know there's matchups that we all want to see, like you said, like Toronto and San Diego. That could have been the final last year. We never got to see it, so we get to see it in week 2. Arrows have the bye week, so it'll be their first game of the season. So it's a hell of a way to start off the year for the Toronto Arrows. But like, yeah, I'm excited for that one. And I'm excited for NOLA versus Old Glory. But I think the rest of the games and stuff, it's always a matter of how the season plays out. Because it's like, yeah, the biggest game of the year and stuff is going to be a game that's probably going to be in week 18. And it'll like, look at the way 2019 ended, man. We ended 2019 with like, what was it, 5 teams that could all like make the playoffs or miss the playoffs entirely. Like that, it was an absolute crazy scenario to end the season. And it was every team had to watch their games, and then like every team was scoreboard watching, because even if you won, if 2 of the other teams won in the right circumstances, it's like even if you won, it could have knocked you out, or it doesn't matter. RUNY ends up losing and still makes the playoffs. Like just the way it all played out, it was crazy. So I mean, week 18 is one that I'm certainly looking forward to, just because of the madness that happened last year. Hopefully that is something that occurs again, because I think that was like the way that whole season played out. That was just a great advertisement for Major League Rugby, just to have, come down to the final weekend of the season and all 6 of the game, or every single game that's being played mattered. And I mean, if we get into a scenario where we're looking at week 17, week 18, and those last 12 games of the season are just absolutely massive, I think that's what you want ultimately out of Major League Rugby. And, the schedule is good. It's pretty, in all honesty, I know I talked about the strength of schedule, but it is pretty well balanced, in fairness, at least from the outset looking in. We'll see how it kind of plays out, if it still feels balanced by the end of the year. But, man, we're getting closer. We got kits, we got schedules. Oh, it's like Christmas. I guess it is actually close to Christmas, but yeah, no, it feels good, man. It's great to, man, players are being signed. It feels like we're almost back to normal.
We're almost there. Now, guys, we've kind of talked about games that we're excited for. Unfortunately, like we said, with the raise in teams, we're not going to see everybody play everybody. What are some matches that you're sad that you won't see? Because I've got a couple that like I'm bummed out that we're not going to be able to see, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, I think after talking to DTH Vandermerver last week, no Toronto LA. That's kind of a disappointing one, especially since LA kind of built up, as you know, with signing Lindsay Stevens, Corey Thomas as well. Like they built up a little bit of a Canadian eligible contingent there too. So that would have been fun. Also, the Toronto doesn't get to play Houston, which is apparently using the Pacific Pride as a development team. So like that's a little bit of a disappointment too, I think, because I think that could have been a lot of fun.
It's just sad for you that you're not going to be able to see their kit against the
Yes.
Arrows.
Oh man. Okay. So that really is the most disappointing thing, is like, because I think if you did put the Arrows in their collars and give me Houston in either their all black, their all blacks kit, or the bright yellow or whatever, best uniform matchup in the league. You do that. Actually, I would go with the yellow, because the contrast between the blue and the yellow would be much better. It would be the best looking. It would be the best looking game in the league. You put it at Aviva Stadium in that like beautiful palace that they've built in Houston or whatever. Even better. We do get. Yeah, I was gonna say Toronto playing Utah. The blue versus the red would also look good, but Toronto plays Utah in Toronto, so it won't have the mountains in the background, so it's not going to be as picturesque. The Pioneer Village subway station isn't exactly as nice of a background as, you know, the mountain ranges in Utah, but yeah. So I mean, I'm kind of, I don't know if it's just because they're the Arrows games, but those were kind of the two that sort of jumped out on me, just kind of conversation that we've had. I know we're super Arrow centric on this podcast, but yeah, those are kind of the two that jumped out at me the most.
Well, one game that I looked up, which isn't happening, is San Diego versus DC. And I think, yes, I'm going to miss the Arrows fixture against Giltinis and against the Sabercats. But I was looking at other teams and I realized that this was a matchup that isn't happening. And, you know, I think DC have come along pretty well in their off season, as we've mentioned before. Maybe San Diego probably haven't retained the strength that they had for 2020. And I think on top of that is that DC finished they finished second in the Eastern Conference last year. And so I know that we wanted to see the Arrows versus San Diego, but, you know, maybe the Legion against Old Glory could have been an interesting matchup as well. So I've basically gone from the first team in the Eastern Conference to the second team in the Eastern Conference last year. And I think that's a game that unfortunately we're going to miss out on, but hopefully we can have again in 2022.
So
Yeah.
In that same light too, like there's no RUNY San Diego as well, which would have been like that was the playoff matchup in 2019, right? And we kind of miss out on that too. It's just the way it is, though. It's like I mean, it's the nature of what it's going to be as the league expands. You just can't simply play everybody. It's the first year that we're doing this. I'm sure when the schedule comes out next year, we probably won't even talk about being disappointed in games that aren't happening, just because it's just the nature of what it is. It's going to be how the league goes moving forward.
I was looking forward to seeing NOLA and the Gilgronis play. I mean, we talked about it a few weeks ago about the depth of backlines. You know, the Arrows and NOLA and the Gilgronis have, you know, really, really deep lineups that I think are. So that would have been a really, really exciting matchup, especially with, you know, Hassler moving there, Bryce Campbell going to the Gilgronis. That would have been quite the slick matchup. One matchup that I was looking forward to seeing that's not happening is the Arrows versus the Seawolves in Toronto. You know, I would have loved to see that happen. You know, unfortunately, the Seawolves got the game in Seattle, which has had mixed reviews, you know, for Arrows fans. But you know, it is what it is, right? Now
you have to have the Arrows have to make like the mandatory appearance at like the Western home base anyways. It's fine.
that's true. It's like when the Blue Jays go to play the Mariners.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to happen
We
every
just have
year.
to figure out how to get all the BC rugby people to be like the Blue Jays that flock south into the state of Washington to Seattle, and then it looks like a Toronto home game.
We got to like set up something with the Seawolves to be like, okay, like the fans will be there. Just build like a temporary stand, and like they'll be there because I know that they're always pretty packed. So that'd be pretty cool. So an interesting thing with this schedule this year, guys, is that only 4 games won't happen either Sunday or Saturday. Now, my question to you is, do we want the league to follow kind of the traditional rugby format where Saturday is a rugby day, and then you have a couple games on Sunday? I know that was a big deal with the Arrows home games. So that way, guys could still go play for their club team and then have the other day to go to the Arrows. Or do we want it to be more like hockey and basketball, even more football? Really, football plays like on like 3 different, sometimes 4 different nights. Do we want the games to be a little bit more spread out? Because I know some people have complained about overlap of games and not being able to watch them all.
One, I kind of think that's a bad comparison, just because it's like hockey and basketball play 82 games, so like they have to play every night of the week, or else their whole structure of the way out the sport works doesn't work.
Maybe the better comparison is football and saying like there's going to be a Thursday night game. There's going to be like keeping it like not always having it all on one day.
Sorry, Dan, but what I think though there's a distinction, like when you're saying football though, it's like there's a difference between the way like the NFL schedules their games and the CFL schedules their games. Like you're wearing a Broncos shirt right now, right? When do the Broncos play next week?
I don't know. I only have this jersey really because it's a Peyton Manning jersey. I don't actually.
Oh my goodness! Okay, so we have Dan, a fake fan here, just trying to not do this. I don't even know. It's a rugby podcast, but you're wearing a football jersey anyway, so we can discuss that later.
So I was watching football today.
Yeah, and you know why you were watching football today? Because it's Sunday. We record this on Sunday, and the way the NFL has shaped.
I'm going to take a pew. Okay.
Oh yeah, just because. Yeah, exactly. But I'm just going to say that like the way the NFL kind of has their thing worked out is like Sunday is an event, and like no matter what, here it goes. The Broncos are. I don't know when the Broncos play either.
Typically, they play at 4 p.m. on Sundays because they're
exactly. You know what time they typically play at. It doesn't like. And here's the thing: if I'm an NFL fan, I know if I turn on my TV, Thursday night at 8:30, Sunday at 1, Sunday at 4:30, or Sunday at 8, or Monday at 8. There's a football game on, right? And like you said, maybe you don't know what team it is, but it's like I just know that that's the NFL schedule, right? It's like it's locked in. You know when you're watching football every day. And Sunday, you turn on your TV at 1 and you can watch football back to back to back. The CFL, though, doesn't do it like that or whatever, where it's like the CFL games can be on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. They played a couple on Tuesdays at some points. Like it's like if you were to ask like, in a similar week, it's like if you were to be like, when did the Broncos play? And you're like, I'm fairly confident that it'll be 4:00 on Sunday, but it could be one of those weird weeks where they play on Monday or Thursday night, right? Whereas like the CFL is like, if you were to be like, when did the Argos play? You're kind of like, I have no idea, because it could be Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It could be an afternoon game. It could be a night game. It could be on Sunday. It could be a holiday, so we're playing on Tuesday instead or something. Like it's right. It's kind of all over the place. And the point that I'm trying to make is I like the fact that it's all on the weekend. And I mean, I'm going to look at the Arrow schedule. Again, we're very Arrow-centric, Canadian rugby podcast and all that. I love the fact that 7 of the 8 Arrows home games are 12:00 on Sunday. Because there's no effort into that. Like that's part of like as you said, like the Broncos, 4:00 Sunday, that's when they play, right? The Arrows can kind of lock into like, if you're like a rugby fan, or even if you're casually interested in it, if it's the same time every day, like there's no thinking about it. It's just like, oh yeah, it's Sunday at noon. It's time for me to go to TSN and turn on the Arrows game, because they're always playing on Sunday. And I think like the league can benefit from doing something like that. For the fans that are like upset about not having games overlap and stuff, I kind of get that, considering there's still only 6 games a week. And like maybe I mean, I don't want to say the solution or anything, but like or whatever. And it's like maybe I could see like in that same sort of NFL kind of sense, maybe you could do the Saturday and the Sunday, but maybe you could have done, a 1 o'clock start, a 4 o'clock start, and an 8 o'clock start on both days or something in order to like balance it out and stuff. Um, but I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, things like video on demand and stuff all works. The games will get put up on YouTube. Um, so I mean, it's easy to catch. At least the league is making it easy to catch replays.
The games being on YouTube is clutch because
like at least
if I know I want to watch the Arrows game at 12, and I know I might miss the Seattle game that's happening at the same time. End of the week, I don't know. I can't really remember how long the difference was when they posted it, but there was I can watch it later that week. It's not the end of the world.
And I think that's the point. Like, if you're going to have the games conflict, make it really easy to watch replays with whatever platform you choose to do with that. But I think ultimately, in making this comparison of like, I would much rather see them kind of lock into, especially since they're not going to conflict with the NFL, like lock into like kind of that, like you said, Saturday's a rugby day, right? Like lock that kind of, I guess, marketing idea into it. Or, if you're going to go Saturday and Sunday, which I think is the better thing to do anyways, it's like kind of, have the teams play at like similar times and stuff. Just make it so like you said, even if you don't check the schedule, a game is happening at a certain time, and turn like the weekend into like an event, kind of like what the NFL did. Not so much what the CFL does, where it's like at least in my opinion, maybe people will argue with me on this, but it's like I have no idea what time CFL games are at because they're all different all the time. There's no consistency. The NFL locked in, when they're playing. That's what I like about it. And I don't mind. I like the idea that there's only 4 games that aren't on Saturday and Sunday.
Stu, you've had the rugby ethos around your life a lot longer than we have. How do you feel about my thought? I agree with Derek, by the way. This was a lob ball question. I wrote it because I wanted to hear your guys' perspectives. Like I already knew mine would be what Derek felt, but I wanted to hear what you thought about it.
Okay, I'm gonna cut this and we're gonna go back, Stu, and redo that part. So I don't sound like I agree with Dan.
Wow. Yeah. I actually thought there was a problem. Anyways, Stu,
right,
go ahead.
So growing up in the UK, the weekends when the rugby season was on was just usually rugby games. So that would mean Saturday is the main choice for games, Sundays as well. Recently, also Friday nights. But the thing that the top leagues within Europe and things like the Six Nations have is that they have national broadcast deals, and it's the broadcasters that provide most of the funding, and so they're the ones who get to determine when those games are being played. Now, George Killebrew said that 36 nationally broadcast games between the partnerships with CBS Sports and Fox will happen for the 2021 season. That works out at 2 national games per week, and that's a good start. But at the same time, it's not enough to prevent overlap with local networks. And I have a feeling that this will continue until MLR gets a national broadcast partner or partners that will be able to broadcast all the games for the season. And if that's split between 2 broadcasters, so for example, in Canada, if it was split between, say, TSN and Sportsnet, then there'd be less chance of overlap. But for the time being, especially with like local partners, it's going to have these overlap games. And I would have to stick with the traditional sense of having games on Saturday and Sunday, because it just ensures that players get the most consistent time to recover from the previous week or previous weeks if they have a bye. And I've got to say, one of the games that isn't on the Saturday or Sunday is in the last week of playing, which is LA versus Seattle. Now, can you imagine the agony of being one of those players on those teams, and you have to wait 3 whole days to find out if you're making the playoffs or not?
Hey,
Yeah,
well, you know what though?
that's
But you should have, if it's you have to wait on the last week of the season, you should have played better the first 17 weeks and made the playoffs without having to worry about what everybody else does, anyways.
that is that is actually a poor teaching skill. Is you do not look on the past, only what you can do in the future, Mr. Brissett. But
Yeah,
you know,
but
like,
if you did better in the past, you wouldn't have to worry about the
oh my
outcome of the
goodness.
Austin
Oh,
Toronto game or whatever. Austin
already
Toronto is not playing in
already
the last
harping
week of the
teams, and no
season.
one's touched the pitch yet.
Yeah.
Well, guys, if you want to look at the schedule, MLR has posted it. The Toronto Arrows did a fantastic job making a very hilarious Simpsons schedule release video. I have a father-in-law that knows nothing about rugby, but he's a big Simpsons fan, so it was quite funny watching it with him. We're gonna move on now, guys, because we've been had a busy couple of weeks with some interviews and other things, so we've missed a little bit of talking about signings, and a lot of them have kind of happened in the last week and a half. And we're going to start with the most recent and most prevalent. Again, Derek has mentioned it a few times. We're a Canadian rugby podcast, so we're going to talk about the Arrows first. And they have done what I love and signed more props. One of them is a new face. Another one is a very not new face. Rob Brower is returning to the Arrows in a very surprising signing. Many people thought that he was done. He just had another child. Congratulations to the Browers. As a father who's got one child under the age of 3, I don't know how they're doing it. And then to say, I am also going to go play professional rugby again, it blows my mind. But he's not alone. Marc-Antoine Ouellette from Quebec, the very first Quebecer, has also signed. Gentlemen, where do these guys fit in the Arrows roster? Because, the props are starting to really fill up. And the slots are starting to kind of, before training camp has already begun, people are starting to kind of rank where they sit. So where do these guys sit?
Brower, who only played 2 games last year, he played the match against Atlanta and then the loss to Colorado that ended the year. But in 2019, he was devoted to the all MLR first 15 at loosehead, basically, essentially the Major League Rugby declaring him the best loosehead prop in the league. And then when he missed the first 3 games of the season, but that match against Atlanta, when he came on in the second half, and it was him, Quatrin, and Keith in the front row, just devastating to the Atlanta scrum. So he's definitely proven that he's should still be in that discussion for one of the best loosehead props in the league, based on what we have seen him play. So if he wants to come back, I am very excited to see him back. I think the thing with the way the Arrows sort of front row is shaping up right now is there is a lot of loose heads, or sorry, there's a lot of tight heads and not very many loose heads. Right now, if you were kind of to make a depth chart for it, obviously Hooker pretty easy to depth chart for the Arrows. It's Quatrin, Ing, and then McRogers. And then you have kind of on the loose head side, you would have Rob Brower and Richie Asieta. Asieta obviously performed amazing through the first 3 games throughout all of 2020. I love the way he's just a great ball carrier, a little bit more dynamic than we're used to with, coming from front row players. And, I think it's a really fun X factor kind of element from his game. But then on the tight head side, you have obviously Cole Keith, Gaston Cortez, the new signing. You have Tyler Rowland, who's been coming over from the Pacific Pride program. He's a super exciting prospect, definitely looking to the future of the country with Tyler Rowland. And now you have Marc-Antoine Ouellette, who is also primarily a tight head prop. So Ouellette kind of strikes me as like, I feel like he's going to be like kind of the 4th guy there. It'll be interesting to be like, maybe they try, Roland or Ouellette to maybe like, cross over to the loose head side. Maybe Pat Lynott comes back. It's just, there's a couple players that still haven't been announced. And, hopefully if Lynott is among them, then obviously that fills up the loose head side. And then you have 3 loose heads, 3 hookers, and then 4 tight heads, which would be the, a good balance for the franchise. So, I feel like that's kind of where it fits in. I think the interesting thing with Ouellette too is obviously the fact that he's a crossover athlete, the Vanier Cup champion with the Laval Rouge in 2016. Only been playing rugby for a couple of years. By all accounts, really impressed at the Rugby Canada High Performance Camp that happened last month. And obviously there was a big Arrows contingent there, as far as both on the pitch as players and within the coaching and managerial staff as well. So obviously Ouellette made a huge impression, and they locked him up to a deal for the upcoming season. I think, especially with like Keith and Cortez and Roland there, I feel like it'll be tough for him to get playing time. But at the same time, it's like there's also obviously the clear need to add another loose head to the roster. Maybe that's Pat Lynott. Hopefully it's Pat Lynott. I like Pat Lynott a lot as a player. Still a couple of guys to be announced from the Arrows. So if Lynott's one of them, that solves a problem. But if not, then it'd be interesting. And there's obviously enough props here. It's just if somebody has to go across, but I think it'll be Lynott anyways. And but yeah, if that's the case, then I feel like Brouwer is going to compete for starting time, and ultimately Ouellette will probably not play too much.
To go back to Rob Brouwer, I think he should be known as Mr. Scrum. I mean, from that rugby ATL game, if you haven't seen it, I urge you to find it on MLR's either Facebook page or YouTube channel. And from when he comes on, even though the scrum has been dominant all game, it just goes that extra step further once Brouwer's on the field. At the same time, I would probably prefer to see him as an impact sub. I've said it once, I'll keep saying it. The focus needs to be on the younger players starting and seeing out more games. Brouwer is someone who can come into the starting 15 due to injury, or if the internationals take place next summer, and
they're not going to take place next summer. Those are definitely going to take place after the season, so we don't have to really worry about that.
Okay, but so don't need to worry about that. But let's say injuries obviously happen. To have someone like Brouwer then be able to come into the starting 15, I think that will, be a great ace in the hand to have for the Arrows. But I think his specialty, along with Gaston Cortez, the two senior members of the team, should be from the bench. For Marky Mark, as he's known on Twitter, should be aiming for the starting 15. He's 25, so he's a bit older than some of the guys in the props, but still at least 9 years younger than Cortez. Tyler Rowlands, Cole Keith, Richie Asiata, they should be aiming to get the best out of each other by competing for the starting roles. These guys can then get mentorship from Brouwer and Cortez. And when Cortez was signed, I said he could probably come in as like the senior figure within the team, riches of European experience as well as international. Obviously, they're going to be coached under Aaron Carpenter, a legend of the Canadian game. And that's the thing. We talk about depth a lot when it comes to the Arrows squad. It just seems to be getting deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
Arrows fans should be very excited for the 2021 season. And the other teams should be cautious at best.
Yeah, very afraid. Be afraid.
Yeah.
I think though too, I think I've kind of talked about it a little bit. The way the Springboks won the World Cup was all on depth. The ability to kind of have like your second best prop and stuff, but have him be able to start, right? And they kind of mixed and matched their pack depending on what they kind of needed and what their opponent was. But ultimately it was like, yeah, well, you hit the 50-minute mark and it's like the new pack kind of came on, and it was guys that were good enough to start, but it was just the strategy that the Springboks like deployed there. And I feel like the Arrows are kind of encroaching on like that territory of maybe they can do that. Where
it's been a weakness of Canada. They have an okay starting pack, but then you look at their bench, it's like, ooh, like compared to other international teams, it's nice to see that the Arrows are accomplishing this. Well, there's been more Canadian rugby news with MLR, and one of the big ones is one of the younger MLR Stars has re-signed with the Seawolves. Nakai Penny is back again with the Seawolves. Very exciting news. Nakai is quite the dynamic player. He has been done really, really well, and it was sad to see him not get selected for the, preliminary roster leading up to the World Cup. Another signing that is been kind of waiting in the reeds. We've been hearing a lot of rumors about it, but now it's official. Regan O'Gorman has officially signed with Austin. Now, gentlemen, I'm gonna pitch a question to you. Which one of these signings are you guys more excited about? We've got a commodity that we know about. We know what Nakai Penny can do in MLR, but Regan O'Gorman's kind of bringing something a little bit unknown. Unless you're really tied into his club rugby in New Zealand.
I unfortunately am not tied into Regan O'Gorman's club rugby, I'm afraid. But I think the thing is that we are seeing especially with the Giltinis, so the other Gil team in the league, is a lot of Australian influences. And so coming through from that, obviously, we also have Regan O'Gorman playing in New Zealand. So the Tasman games or leagues going on, especially in Super Rugby as well. That experience coming over, I think that will contrast nicely with a lot of European experience that has come over from players both in the US and Canada that have experience in Europe. And I think it'll be an interesting matchup. I know Southern Hemisphere rugby, especially when it comes to things like the Wallabies and the All Blacks, is focused more on attacking, and European is more defensive, focused on the kicking game. So that'll be an interesting matchup with skills and expertise to see. But I've got to say, Nakai Penny coming back, I think, is a fantastic slam dunk for the Seawolves. When it comes to positions like flankers, you want them to have quiet games, because if they have a quiet game, it means they're doing their job. And then it's just dependent on, the front row being able to perform the set pieces, the backs hopefully being able to score. But I mean, we've had for the past decade been looking at rugby players all over the world that are flankers that, elevate their game. I'm talking like Sam Warburton, David Pocock. And I'm not saying that Nakai Penny is in their league, but at the same point, you want to have these good, reliable workhorses in your team. So I think that's a great signing for the Seawolves.
Yeah, I think, now that, to be honest with you, man, now that we were talking about some of the matchups that's kind of disappointing, and now that you kind of mentioned Nakai Penny, I think, I think he's definitely a guy that deserves a shot with the Canadian national team for sure. He's played excellently in his 2 seasons of MLR so far. I think, it would be interesting to see Seattle play rugby ATL, to have him go head to head against Matt Heaton. That's not going to happen. Seattle does still play Toronto, which means he can go up against Lucas Rumball, which, in that head to head situation, which will be obviously fascinating to watch, man. I think Penny's kind of slowly developing, even though maybe he hasn't got that national team recognition, I think he's slowly developing into one of the better flankers in Canada, especially one of the better open sides in Canada too. And I think, if he can put together another, especially like if we're kind of looking at like the World Cup qualifiers not being until after the season ends, and that maybe that's the first Canadian national rugby team game, since COVID hit, then, if that's the timeline, man, maybe he can use the 2021 season to propel himself into that, into the jersey again, right? So that's something that I'm definitely looking forward to seeing him watch. Seattle also kind of added, they re-signed Sears Duru, they re-signed Barton. So Hassler is out the door to Austin to join Regan O'Gorman, but the Seattle contingent, or the Seattle Canadian contingent, will still be strong. The Regan O'Gorman signing, I think, is fascinating. Just because, looking at it, man, it's like Austin's engine room is sweet. It's like, I don't know, like Austin has been having a heck of an offseason here. So Regan O'Gorman, obviously, 24 years old. Like you said, he's been playing in New Zealand, playing for South Canterbury. He's played for Canada U20. He's played for the Thunderbirds. so he's got a little bit of that resume built up, but you also got like the other locks on Austin right now. You got Christian Otsberg, and then you have Sebastian de Chavez, who's U20 Springboks, played for the Tigers, he's played for the London Irish. Isaac Ross is a freaking All Black. And like he's played 8, like, yeah, and it's 8 games, but I mean 8 games is, you're an All Black, man. That's what you do. And he's going to be a little bit of in that player coach role, right? So and if he's being coached, so O'Gorman's going to be, I guess, being coached by an All Black. And I feel like this is like one of those things that's kind of low key. Like, does anybody realize that Austin has 3 All Blacks? Like, I feel like this is not a thing that we talk about enough. Austin
It's
has
like a squirrel collecting nuts for the winter. It's like, I just need some All Blacks for this winter.
Exactly. I just need some All Blacks.
Big deal.
Yeah, they got Ross, McIntosh, and Halai. Like they have it's a combined 10 caps between those 3 guys. But I mean, like, hey, like we got All Blacks, man. So I feel like that's just kind of like one of those like low key things in this league, is that there's just a team that has 3 All Blacks. Because of that, though, I mean, they also have Cam Dodson, who was, the projected, at one point was a projected number 1 pick, and then there was some questions about his eligibility, and then ultimately didn't go drafted, and then Austin signed him. So I mean, based on the draft order, if that was the case, Austin kind of lucked out on that. But he's a lock too, but he can also play 8. So that'll be interesting, and I guess they'll see if the Austin shifts him back to 8, because they have some 4 outstanding locks here, and bringing Osberg back from Europe as well. You get the local Round Rock kind of native there too, so it's like there's a lot going on for the Austin Gilgroni scrum in the engine room, and that's going to be some competition for the 4 and the 5 jersey. So I'm really interested to see how Regan O'Gorman performs in that scenario. And then also it'll be the same thing, man. Like, I think that's going to be one of the great things about this season. And it's going to be like, I can't wait to see him, if he has to play against like, Connor Keys or Mike Shepard or, players like that, to just kind of, all right, this is your benchmark that you have to hit. If you want to be on the national team, you got to beat this guy. So those head-to-head matchups, I think, will be a lot of fun. And I think that's part of what is also so great about so many Canadians being in the league, is we're going to get to see that a lot more now.
And also the Rugby Canada team is going to have more, again, like we've talked about,
more
how
film, more tape,
more guys are going to be in better shape. Like the tape that they're going to have to prepare for these test matches that are coming up post MLR, because again, there most likely will not be any Rugby Canada games, so they're going to have to base it off of European games and also MLR. So it is great. One little bit of MLR news before we move on to kind of some international stuff is that RUNY will be starting the season without any fans in the stands. They said that because of COVID-19 kind of running rampant in New York, the state, they have decided to start the season with doors closed. We've seen it all over the world, especially in Europe. There have been very few instances of fans in the stands. So RUNY being the first team in the United States to kind of take that step, which is very interesting.
I don't think they said that, though. They just said that as of right now, they can't have fans, so they're not going to sell tickets until they know they can have fans.
Fair point, but like, really, how much is going to change in New York? Like,
I don't know.
Now and March, like, things are getting worse.
But I just think based on like, because like you're referring to like their announcement they put up on social media, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that would be, it just says that it's like, given the state of COVID-19 in New York State, we are and New York State's current decision to not allow fans at live sporting events, it's simply not possible to do so at the moment. So we want to be straight with you and not start ticket sales until we know for sure that you can attend our games. So that's what their statement is. So I don't think they're saying we don't want to play games with fans. I think it's just like they are taking the stance that they're not going to sell the tickets until they can actually guarantee fans will be able to, I guess, use them. I think that's
I
kind
mean,
of
okay, it's a little bit of splitting hairs. One is saying that they're not going to have fans, and one's saying they're not going to sell tickets. It's essentially it's going to boil down to the same thing. Like I don't think, and again, it's I don't think. So I'm interpreting what they posted. I just don't think that they're going to start the season with fans.
They probably,
because other teams have similar
San
situations.
Diego put out a similar statement too, saying that they're not going to sell the tickets, right? I think it's kind of just like, the current state of where we are. I know some teams are selling tickets, and I don't think that's I don't think that's a bad idea. I don't think what RUNY and San Diego are doing is necessarily a bad idea either. It might be less hassle if for those.
I mean,
maybe
like
it's
what
less hassle,
happens?
like
What happens to all the people that have? I mean, like currently the way that arrows are smart and they're setting it up is that the Founders Club are the first ones to get the tickets.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a whole mass of reimbursements if they end up getting to people who paid, and they're not going to have any home games to start the season. It's tough because we're talking about things that haven't happened yet.
I think
perhaps I should have worded the quote differently, but at the end of the day, it's not a great outlook for fans in the stands for RUNY.
No, it probably isn't. And I mean, I think that'll be interesting because it's like clearly, with like Utah's already played games with fans through the Utah Selects. I think NOLA's played some games I don't know. Yeah, NOLA NOLA played in Atlanta or whatever. So Atlanta played games with fans. Excuse me, I think I had that backwards in my head. But Atlanta and Utah have been playing games with some fans in attendance, right? So it'll be interesting. So it's like I don't think you can fault teams for selling tickets, even if maybe rules change and they have to do something about that. But I don't think I kind of like what RUNY like. I mean, maybe it's just like, if we can't have fans or whatever, maybe it saves, like you said, saves the hassle of having to refund everybody and stuff. I'm sure there's still fans that are definitely interested in those season tickets. But there's, I feel like the COVID is obviously still like an ongoing situation. And I mean, even based on that, like we can't even guarantee we're like at, where some teams will be playing home games and stuff too, right? Like, there's still a lot to be determined before March, and I think like government rules are still like constantly moving every day and stuff. Especially, I'm sure everybody can just kind of see where they live themselves is probably constantly changing, or you have to check the news every day for like new updates. I know like me and my girlfriend went to do a little like Christmas shopping and stuff yesterday, and every time we went into a store, you have to do a COVID screening now, right? Like they actually sit there with a clipboard and ask you a bunch of questions, which is something that I didn't see before yesterday. So like that's, it's a constantly evolving situation. I'm sure ultimately, like if RUNY can have fans in the crowd and they can have fans in the crowd safely, like they're gonna do it. But I think right now they're just kind of taking the stance that it's like we can't guarantee it. So we're not going to sell tickets to something that we can't guarantee that's going to actually happen. So I guess I at the very least that's where I took what they were doing as, and that's where I also think San Diego was kind of along the same lines. There is just if we can have fans, we'll have them, but right now we can't guarantee that fans will be there, so we're not gonna ask people for money in the event that we're not going to be able to actually deliver that service that they're paying for.
So one thing I found from the statement that may be of interest is that RUNY were talking about fan virtual match day experiences. And, we obviously can't predict what's going to happen with COVID, but when we had Bill Webb on before, he was saying that the Arrows will be playing their games, but that may not necessarily mean they're playing in Canada when it comes to their home games, talking about doing double headers with a as yet to be named team for the Eastern Conference. I think something like that would be especially beneficial to Arrows fans, because as long as the border is closed to non-essential travel between the US and Canada, I believe that it's going to have a negative effect on the Arrows and the fans that they can't have at their games. And it may obviously be different come March. It may be different come July as well. And my big thing is that I hope that once vaccines become available for as many people as possible, both in Ontario and in the United States, that people will get them and they can, the sooner we can put this disease behind us, the sooner that we can not have to worry about these kind of things. So my plea to all Arrows fans and all fans of MLR is get the vaccine so we can all get back in the stadium as soon as possible.
So, guys, we're going to move on now. And this is a little bit of a story that's been kind of coming to the surface in the last week or so. World Rugby, English Rugby, and the Welsh Rugby Union are all currently dealing with a concussion lawsuit from 8 former players who are currently all under the age of 45. And they're all kind of dealing with issues that have kind of come up from their playing careers. Especially a lot of them started, the turn of professional rugby. Their claim is that the governing bodies have failed in their duty of care, having not acted upon known risks of head injury, particularly after professionalism led to a clear change in the sport's dynamics. And that was a quote from The Guardian that really kind of first broke this. And my first question, guys, is will this lawsuit have a lasting effect on player safety? Because it's been that, I think, looking at how people have been reacting, how players and reporters have been talking about this lawsuit, is will this have a fundamental change on player safety? Because when you look at this calendar year of how many games were pushed together, that is my first thought when it comes to this lawsuit.
Well,
so I'm gonna.
You know what, Stu? You can go first.
I'm gonna say thank you. I'm gonna say absolutely, but at the same time, I also believe that World Rugby has looked at the situation, at a similar situation, but both with the NFL and their CTE history. They've also had the experience with the Football Association in England, because many players from the FA and from the England World Cup winning squad of the 1960s, they played with leather footballs, and they found that heading those leather footballs has had the knock-on effect of CTE, concussion, head trauma, early onset dementia, and so they changed the law because of that. And I think that obviously player safety has to be first and foremost for all these unions and World Rugby. And measures have been taken. Measures will be taken. Are they enough? Sadly, we won't know until it's too late. I do want to mention that Steve Thompson, who was behind, has been the main vocal side from this case. Who played and won. He played for England, won the 2003 World Cup, and has played in the 2007 and 2011 World Cup. He says that he guesses that a lot of players from that era, that is the turn of professionalism, may end up having similar problems. I can see the numbers being high, especially for the first players to come through 96, 97 up to the mid 2000s, really. He could see attitudes were changing by the end of the career. So he's saying that the 2011 World Cup camp was completely different to the 2003 World Cup camp. In 2011, it was a lot more technical, whereas in 2003, you just had to beat yourself. So you just had to be like the strongest player on the pitch. And I know there's, unfortunately, one corner of the internet that will complain about this and say, the game's gone soft. Thompson has explicitly stated, I don't want to kill the game, I want it regulated. And something that Thompson also mentioned is that he has a suggestion of how to improve player welfare in the long run, following a simple requisite that already exists in French rugby. So when you play in France, you have a heart scan at the start of each season in order to be able to play. So why don't they have scans of their brains as well to identify any like brain issue or any problem that can be happening? Because, and Steve Thompson goes on to say, lads are going to be 22 or 23 and they're going to have to retire. But trust me, it's better finishing then than to be where he is now. The reality is we have seen professional players who are in their early 20s had to retire because they haven't been able to recover from concussion or injuries related to CTE. And obviously
Cameron Pierce, Canadian, was playing overseas, retired early at the age of like 23, 24. He's a perfect example of that. And now he's working towards, fighting for things like this. He's a perfect example of that, Stu.
Exactly. That's what I mean. I know in the UK, because of the structure that rugby has been around for much longer, with things like academies and junior player structures, is that if you have been playing at a professional level in your early 20s, that most likely means that you only have the basic mandatory level of education requirements from your high school, and your career has been rugby, and now your career suddenly ends not on your terms. And what you'll most likely have to do will either get a job in the physical labor market, so like bricklayer, electrician, things like that, or study for higher education. And in most cases, even being in something like the blue collar jobs, you still have to do training in order to get those jobs. And you have to do that whilst maintaining your brain injury. And it's a vicious cycle, because you've gone from being well funded and having medical facilities available to you, but as soon as you have to retire at the end of that season, those things that were once readily available to you aren't so much anymore. Obviously, in things like in the UK and Canada, we have public healthcare to allow us to go to the hospital whenever. But in a situation as the sport's going in the US, and we all know the horror stories of US medical bills and things like that, it's going to have like a huge knock-on effect.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think like it should have an impact on player safety. Like we should be, I think, there's, because this isn't even like the only lawsuit, and we know like Jamie Cudmore has had his own like litigation with French rugby in Claremont for some of the things where he's like, yeah, it's like I got a concussion. He was saying like he got a concussion in a game, failed the concussion test, and then they still asked him to go back out and play and stuff, right? And like I think there's a lot of, you have to like, we have to obviously make the game as safe as possible. And seeing the impact of some of the the collisions and the hits in rugby, if like, yeah, if you can do anything to make it safer, and like that's probably like changing up some protocols, being like, yeah, if you're diagnosed with a concussion, you're out for maybe like an extra week or an extra 2 weeks than normal, or add on to that time off, or like just kind of maybe make that protocol a little bit stricter. It's like if you have the HIA or whatever, and it's like unless you pass it with flying colors, it's like maybe you get a little bit stricter and maybe you take the guy out of the game. I don't really know what the answer is. But I think the one thing that kind of strikes me though sometimes in reading through the article and what Steve Thompson was saying, and like he was mentioning things about like not remembering winning the World Cup in 2003, and he only really knows of it because he's seen it in videos. It kind of got me to like kind of thinking and stuff too of like kind of those other incidents. And I mean, Dr. Bennett Omalu, he published his CTE research that was kind of off the basis of finding CTE in a Pittsburgh Steelers player that passed away. And he published that in 2005, right? So like that research on CTE is about 15 years old based on when it got published. And I think one of the things, it's like I feel like we know a lot more about concussions now than we ever did, which is probably something you can say for a lot of subjects. But like, if anybody has ever, like, if you ever go back, and I know COVID kind of gave people a lot of time to do this, it's like earlier in the year when there was no sports happening. It's like a lot of sports channels, they would put out classic games. World Rugby put out a lot of classic games. Basically ESPN, TSN, Sportsnet, they all did it. And it's like, if you really watch, because part of what they were talking about was the turn of professionalism, like that late 90s or early 2000s stretch. And in all honesty, like going back, it's like if you watch any physical contact sport from those eras, whether it's rugby, whether it's football, whether it's hockey or anything else, and it's like there are tons of moments where you will watch a game and be like, oh man, that guy should not be allowed to come back into this game. But because it's the early 90s or the early 2000s, they came back in the game. I think, some like famous ones, like, from the same year, we can use, the 2003 Rugby World Cup, which is what Thompson is saying he can't remember. Similarly, hockey fans will remember Paul Correa being hit by Scott Stevens, being clearly unconscious because he wore the oversized visor. You can see him wake up on the ice. He comes back and he scores a goal in that game. It's probably he's a Hall of Fame player, and that goal for Korea is probably the most iconic moment of his career, and Korea doesn't remember it. And quite frankly, it's 2003, and looking back on that game, you should have been like, there should be no way he should have been allowed back in that game. He played the next game in the series too, and again, there's no way, looking back on it now, you're like, there's no way he should have been allowed to do that. And I think like that's some of the things that's like, the concussion protocol and everything does need to get better. And it's like, when you see these gentlemen being diagnosed with like early onset dementia and things being caused by CTE, it's like, it's, identify that, yeah, like that is a problem. Like, head injuries are very serious, and you have to take the proper precautions to handle them. We'll see how England and the RFU and World Rugby handle the lawsuit and stuff, and whether it be like, whether it goes to court or whether it's just financial settlements and things like that. Kind of what the end, like similar, I think the NFL, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but what the NFL, I think, was some sort of financial settlement for their, concussion protocols
in the millions,
multi-million,
hundreds of
millions. Yeah. So it's like, maybe this ends up kind of being the same thing. I think just ultimately, as a contact sport, you just have to, like, every contact sport concussions should be an issue, and it's like, you have to be concerned, and you have to make sure you take the proper precautions to make sure every player is as safe as possible. And if there is a concussion risk, or if a player has a concussion, like, let them get back to 100%. Like, don't rush anybody back from a concussion, because the worst thing that's going to happen if you have a concussion is you take another hit and it gives you a worse concussion. Sure. Right. So
as someone that has had concussions from sports and just from life, I was in a pretty serious car accident. Since that car accident, I've felt the effect on my my ability to remember things, or I don't remember the car accident, but like, even just like my memory, my short-term memory is horrible since then. So it is very serious, and I'm glad that we can have discussions like this about these important topics. But let's finish off on a high note, gentlemen. It has been a long year. It has been a very long year.
See, because I know what we're about to talk about, Stu. I love that Dan was like, let's finish on a high note by talking about 2020. Like, who like that?
Well, it's being put between a rock and a hard place. What do you want me to do? But guys, it has been a really strange year for rugby. But I want to ask you, what would be, if you look back at 2020 and all the games that didn't happen, but what would be your match of the year?
Oh man, Toronto, San Diego at the MLR final. Oh, damn. Maybe not.
Alternative reality. Yeah,
that was crazy, man. I can't believe Dan Moore scored 7 tries in the final. That was unreal.
Tries. Okay.
Exactly. Hey, that happened somewhere, I think. That's why he retired. It's like, you can't be better than that. You just go out on top.
He's got the all-seeing eye. He knew what happened.
Yeah, exactly. And he was just like, yeah, I'm good. I guess I think obviously this was a super weird year with the massive layoff. I think though, amidst all the craziness, the one match to me that it's like if we're 10, 15 years from now, the one match that we'll talk about from this, I think is going to be the Pumas beating the All Blacks. I think that's going to be the defining match of this year, because I think, in all honesty, I think because of COVID, like even the matches that had like the Six Nation matches that happened before COVID, I'm like, like I would have to rewatch a lot of them again. I feel like, to be like, because it's just, this year's been a weird blur where time doesn't exist properly, and like, yeah, it's things that happened a week ago feel like a month ago, things that happened a month ago feel like 6 months ago, and things that happened 6 months ago feel like 20 years ago now. So well, I think that's the one that's going to stick out to me, is going to be the All Blacks Pumas. Unfortunate aftermath of that match though too, which might kind of taint it, with a lot of the players being banned for their comments on social media. But yeah, I think the game itself will kind of stick out, just because I think it's that anytime a country beats the All Blacks for the first time, I feel like there's that little historic element to it. And then as is tradition, after the All Blacks lose to a team, they kill them by 30 points.
What about you, Stu? What was your match of the year?
Yes, Argentina versus the All Blacks is definitely up there. As a Wales fan, I was saddened that they had decided to not play any games for the rest of the year. And yeah, I'm just.
Are you sure about that, Stu? I seem to remember a couple of Wales games, like in the Autumn Nations Cup. Are you?
Well,
are you sure about that?
Well, I didn't see them, so therefore they didn't happen. They had no games. I will say a game that is close to me for a number of reasons was from MLR would have been Toronto versus Seattle. Obviously, there's the vengeance from the 2019 semi-final that losing to Seattle in Seattle, only to then go back this year to avenge that loss. And Dan Moore's last try of his career was actually in that game as well. It was also, I didn't see the game live, unfortunately, and that's because it was the same day as my sister's wedding. So there's that. That's why that match date has a bit of a personal connection to me. But I think that was also the game where it was just like before COVID had really taken off. And I was thinking, man, the Arrows are going to do so well this season. I'm looking forward to all other 12 weeks, all these other matches set to come up. I'm looking forward to seeing Ma Nanu in Toronto, back when ignorance was still possible to have. But as you said, alternative realities where Dan Moore scored 7 tries in the final.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer, Stu. But I thought that maybe one of you guys want to answer it, so I'm going to go with the North-South game in New Zealand.
That game was cool too. Yeah, that was
a really fun game. It was just it was fun, and I think part of it why I remember it so vividly is just no one. There was 0 expectations. Everyone kind of didn't know really what it was going to be like. And there just wasn't any pressure. Like, it wasn't like the Tri-Nations where you had to beat Australia, you had to beat Argentina, or, like the Six Nations or this Autumn Nations Cup. It was just a fun game that, they just went out and gave it their all and had a blast. And I think for our podcast, that is where it kind of, that bounced us into starting to interview players, because that's when Cole Keith came up with the idea with the West versus East, and that kind of started that ball. So in terms of our podcast, that game just has a little bit of fun significance to me. Now, guys, let's look forward to the future, to 2021, because there are a lot of exciting things. Like we said, MLR has their schedule out. The World Cup qualifiers are going to start in post that season. So what do you hope happens in 2021? I know the easy answer is that North American rugby starts, but let's assume that all goes according to plan. What do you hope happens in 2021? And I want to go first, and I want to say that.
Okay, I'll let you. All right,
I want to go first because I hope that in terms of Rugby Canada, they give the young guys a chance to play. You know, we saw Will Percillier play 80 minutes in his starting debut, and 20 of that was as a fly half. So, you know, we've got some really exciting young players that are starting to develop in their, you know, different spots all over the world. Let's get them in. Let's have them play some matches, you know. So that's what I hope happens. I hope these young Canadians get a chance to further their careers in Europe. I hope these young guys get a chance to further their careers in Canada and in with the Arrows and in MLR. I hope that I just see starting Canadians all over the place.
Yeah, that would be fun. I feel like I mean, I would love to see all of that too. I feel like, did you guys, I know we're all kind of a little bit nerdy here. So, I mean, I'm sure, did you guys see like what Disney did like on Friday and Thursday night and Friday?
Just dropped a whole bunch of stuff.
Just dropped everything. They were like, congratulations, you have survived 2020. Your reward is all of these Star Wars movies and TV shows, all of these Marvel movies and TV shows, and the Mighty Ducks are coming back. That's what you get for passing 2020. And they just kind of unveiled like all the cool stuff that they're going to do. And I feel like I want to see World Rugby do the exact same like Disney style trailer. 2021, man, like you said, Dan, if all goes according to plan, Lions Tour, World Cup, Olympics. I mean, like that's like, I don't know how you get better than that. Like you have the women's World Cup, you have the 2 Olympic sevens tournaments and stuff. You said all goes according to plan, so
listen. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah,
I am fired up,
and I think looking at that too is like obviously, and then even like the World Cup qualifying for the men too, like that's gonna happen. A full MLR season, but yeah, I think the big three. I mean, obviously from the North American point of view, full MLR season would be awesome. The World Cup, but I think like, you know, rugby as a whole, the Lions Tour, the Women's World Cup, the Olympics. But I think even like from the Canadian point of view, like the World Cup could be massive, man. Like the Canadian women's team, like I don't know if you guys like watched the Premier 15s this past weekend. The Canadian women freaking dominated it.
I watched the Longborough versus Exeter game.
Yes, Longborough, Lightning versus Chiefs. The 6 best players on the field were Canadian. It was amazing. And
Kate Zachary.
Yeah. But Kate Zachary's team's going to be out in the pool stage at the World Cup. It's fine. But yeah, she was outstanding too. But to be honest, that's a great thing. Like, I think you look at the World Cup though, and I'll make the joke about Kate Zachary there, but it's like, because Canada USA has that rivalry, and it's like the World Cup has the best pool draw you could have possibly, like we said a couple of weeks ago, it's like you can't rig it any better, like if you wanted to. So you have that, but like the Canadian women's team has a legit shot at winning a gold medal like at that World Cup. And it's like you're gonna have to go through the United States in your pool. You're probably gonna have to go through England. You might have to go through New Zealand on their own turf, right? So like the Black Ferns at home, that's not easy, but like Canada can do it. Like there's no reason to doubt that. And then you also have like the Olympics, where the women's team is kind of in a similar boat, man, where it's like, you know, go through like a couple of those top teams, right? If you can get through like New Zealand and stuff, like maybe like there's a chance at a gold medal. And like that, if you're going to be like, what's my like ideal 2020 is like, you know, the women's team. Like, I mean, we're all super excited about whatever these Macron jerseys are going to look like, and we're all like, you know, they should have collars on them and stuff. And because everybody, like we saw with the Free Jacks, we saw with the Arrows this year, everyone goes nuts when you see like the classic collar on a rugby jersey. They look amazing. And you know what makes collars look even better? When they have gold medals draped around them. So that's what I want to see out of 2021. I want to see Canada with some gold. Most likely, the Women's World Cup and the Olympic sevens tournament. probably for the women, but if the men can do it too, that would be that would be the biggest upset in sports history. I feel like if the men win maybe that'd be up there. It'd be up there if the men can go through and win the Olympic tournament. But they've won 7 tournaments before, so it's not completely out of the question. But the women, I feel like just are a little bit more likely. But I feel like that would be fun. So hopefully, with all these tournaments, man, I want to see some gold wrapped around some Canadian beautiful Macron collars next year. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, I mean, there's hopefully a lot to look forward to.
Stu's just excited that Wales gets to play a game again.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it'll be the first time since March. Yeah, so thrilled about
Stu's
that.
like it'll be the first time since, when did Sam Warburton retire? It'll be the first time since then.
Yeah. So I obviously agree with everything that you just mentioned, Derek. There's one thing that I would like to see that was meant to happen this year and got cancelled about a few months ago. And that would be the double header on Halloween weekend in Vancouver, because if it's going to be the same as was originally stated with Canada versus the USA, that would probably also form part of the World Cup allocation for America's one. And it could be a case of the US versus Canada, their first round game in the US happened the week before, and then it would be the final of the double round robin would be in Vancouver with 50,000 fans all dressed up in Halloween attire. I think that would be a sight to behold. Not just the fancy dress and the costumes, just a full stadium in North America. I think that'll be a sight to behold, to say the least. Because I think there's one thing I enjoy more than just going to a rugby match. It's going to 2 rugby matches for the price of 1. So, and you know, the 2020 edition was cancelled. Maybe both days should have 2 games on at the same time. Well, not at the same time, back to back. So I think, you know, get everyone
4 teams and 2 balls on the pitch at the same time.
Yeah, multi-ball madness.
Navigate that. That'd be fun. I think though the one thing we definitely have to admit, also mention too, this podcast was a ton of fun this year. So I'm super excited to do this podcast when we actually have rugby games to talk
Oh my
about
goodness, yeah,
in Canada.
It's been quite the journey. You know, we added Stu to the show. We've been interviewing some amazing guests, you know, from Arrows players to, you know, Jamie Cudmore to Bill Webb, DTH, Doug Fraser. You know, we've been very, very fortunate to be able to create this platform and then see it grow the past year. So, you know, hats off to all you listeners. It's been fantastic putting this content out for all of you. This will be our last episode of 2020, as you know, we've kind of finished our year in review and looking ahead. So we will be taking the break for the holidays and coming back in the new year, looking to hit the ground running with more interviews, more previews, and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. So if you want to listen to more of our episodes, especially some of these really fun interviews that we've had, you can go to our social media platforms on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're all there, Rouge Rugby. And also, if you are looking to help the podcast grow so other people can see it and fall in love with Canadian rugby, leave us a review. You know, throw us a little 5-star review, write a little comment, tell us what you like, what you don't like. And it would just help us so much growing the podcast. And, you know, as we grow into the future, we really appreciate all of the fans kind of commenting on our stuff, you know, giving us little bits and pieces of advice of what they'd like to see in the show. And we hope that everyone has a safe and happy holidays, and that come 2021, we get ready for what looks like to be a very exciting year of rugby.
And a lot of gold medals.